Remember me, cowboy? I'm the Apache girl you saved years ago. I've returned to marry you." The wind howled across the empty plains, carrying with it the sharp sting of snow. Jacob, a lone cowboy, pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his weary horse along the narrow trail. He had been traveling for hours through the freezing winter, returning from a long cattle drive. The sky was gray and heavy, promising a storm that could trap even the hardiest traveler. Yet Jacob pressed on. He was used to solitude, and the silence of the open land had become a familiar companion. As he crested a small hill, Jacob noticed something unusual. A faint cry carried over the wind, almost swallowed by the storm. He squinted into the white haze, heart quickening. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Someone was calling for help. He urged his horse forward, each step sinking into the soft snow. The cries grew louder, more desperate. Following the sound, Jacob discovered a small figure struggling against the snow. It was a young girl, barely 10 years old, with long, dark hair plastered to her face from the wet snow. Her clothes were thin, clearly not enough to protect her from the freezing air. She shivered violently, and her tiny hands were red from the cold. Jacob's heart tightened. Without a second thought, he dismounted and knelt beside her. "Are you all right, little one?" he asked, his voice steady but gentle. The girl's eyes, wide and terrified, met his. She opened her mouth to speak, but the cold made her words a faint whisper. Jacob realized she could not last long in the storm. He quickly lifted her into his arms, feeling the small, fragile weight of her body against him. She clung to him instinctively, and he could sense the fear that had carried her this far. Jacob knew the terrain well. There was a small cabin a few miles ahead where he could find shelter. But he wrapped the girl in his coat as best as he could and set off through the snow, each step a struggle against the biting wind. His horse trudged alongside, its breath forming clouds in the cold air. The storm was relentless, but Jacob focused on the girl, willing to endure anything to keep her safe. Hours passed as he battled the icy path, his own body numbed by cold, yet he refused to slow. The girl's shivering gradually lessened as he held her close, whispering words of comfort. He learned that her name was Ayana, and though her voice was weak, her spirit seemed unbroken. She had been separated from her family while traveling between settlements, and had gotten lost in the blizzard. Alone and terrified, she had wandered until she could go no further. Jacob admired her courage. Despite her fear, she had survived the storm, until he found her. He could see the determination in her eyes, the quiet strength that belied her small size. It reminded him of the resilience of the land itself, harsh, unforgiving, yet full of life and endurance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jacob spotted the cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney, a sign that warmth awaited inside. He hurried the last few steps, gently lowering Ayana to the snow in front of the door. He pounded on the wooden door until it opened, and a kind-faced woman peered out, startled by the sight of the cowboy carrying the girl through the snow. "Please, she needs help," Jacob said quickly. "She's been caught in the storm." The woman didn't hesitate. She ushered them inside, wrapping Ayana in blankets and bringing her warm food. Jacob stayed by her side, watching as color slowly returned to her cheeks and warmth spread through her small body. As the evening settled in, the storm raged outside, but inside the cabin there was a quiet sense of safety. Jacob and Ayana sat by the fire, and though neither spoke much, a bond began to form. She trusted him, and he promised himself he would do everything to protect her. Night fell, and the storm showed no sign of ending. Jacob decided he could not leave her alone in such harsh conditions. He took the corner of the cabin for himself, keeping a watchful eye on the girl as she slept. He thought of how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could change, and how a single act of courage could alter the course of someone's life forever. When Ayanna awoke the next morning, she found Jacob tending to the fire. He smiled gently, and for the first time since the storm, she felt a small spark of hope. Jacob handed her a warm cup of tea, and she sipped it slowly, savoring the heat that chased away the lingering chill. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice still soft but filled with gratitude. Jacob nodded. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." The journey back to safety was still ahead, but Jacob was prepared. He secured Ayanna on his horse, wrapping her tightly in blankets. The storm had lessened, leaving a cold, crisp morning. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting a pale golden light over the snow-covered landscape. Each step of the horse carried them toward a safer place, a new beginning. As they traveled, Jacob learned more about Ayanna. She spoke of her family, the small Apache community she belonged to, and the hardships she had faced before the storm. Jacob listened, amazed at the wisdom and courage of someone so young. He realized that this small girl, lost and frightened, carried within her a strength that would inspire him for years to come. By the time they reached a larger settlement, Ayanna was strong enough to walk on her own. Jacob helped her to the door of a local inn where her family had been desperately searching for her. The reunion was filled with tears, relief, and heartfelt gratitude. Ayanna's parents embraced her tightly, thanking Jacob over and over for his bravery. Jacob watched quietly, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had risked his life for a stranger, and in doing so, had changed the course of hers forever. As he mounted his horse to continue his journey, Ayanna ran to the edge of the crowd, waving at him. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, a bond was acknowledged, one that would not fade with time or distance. As Jacob rode away, he felt a strange mixture of longing and fulfillment. The snowstorm had tested him, challenged him, and in the end, it had revealed something important: the courage to act, the strength to endure, and the quiet power of compassion. Ayanna's life had been saved, but Jacob knew that he too had been touched by this encounter in a way that would stay with him forever. The plains stretched out endlessly before him, white and cold, yet full of promise. Jacob rode on, carrying with him the memory of the girl who had survived the storm, and the knowledge that sometimes destiny could appear in the most unexpected ways. And though neither of them knew it yet, the night he had saved her would mark the beginning of a story that neither time nor distance could erase. Years passed after that harsh winter, when Jacob had saved Ayanna. The memory of that night remained with both of them, though life had pulled them in different directions. Ayanna grew older, her small frame becoming strong and resilient. Every day she remembered the cowboy who had risked his life for her. His kindness, his courage, and the warmth in his eyes had left an imprint she could never forget. Ayanna's life in her Apache community was full of challenges. She learned the ways of her people, how to track animals, find water, and survive in the harsh lands. She listened to the elders' stories around the fire, tales of courage and survival, and she dreamed of the day she might see the cowboy again. Though her world was rooted in tradition, her heart often wandered to the memory of Jacob, wondering if he was still out there, somewhere, living his life. Jacob, meanwhile, returned to his ranch. He worked hard every day, tending to his cattle and repairing fences, the wide open plains his only companions. He often thought of that winter night, the girl he had carried through the storm. He wondered what had become of her. He didn't expect to see her again. Yet a small part of him held a hope he would never admit aloud. The memory of her frightened but trusting eyes stayed with him, a quiet reminder of the fragile and precious moments life sometimes offered. The years brought changes. Ayanna became skilled, strong, and wise beyond her years. She helped her family and taught the younger children the skills she had learned. But she never forgot Jacob. Every time she thought of the winter storm, she felt a mix of fear and gratitude. That night had changed her life forever, and she knew it had also shaped who she had become. Determined to find him, Ayanna began quietly asking around about the cowboy who had saved her. She spoke to travelers, messengers, and anyone who had wandered near the plains. She learned of small towns, distant ranches, and roads that stretched across the territory. Piece by piece, she followed the trail, always careful not to reveal too much of herself, yet always keeping her goal in mind. Jacob's life, though peaceful, was not without hardship. Winter after winter tested his endurance, and the isolation weighed on him at times. He thought often of the people he had helped, but Ayanna's image was the one that lingered the most. He remembered the look in her eyes when she had whispered her thanks, the relief in her tiny body as he carried her through the snow. He wondered what kind of life she had built, and if she had survived the years with courage as he remembered her. One summer morning, Ayanna's journey brought her to a small town not far from Jacob's ranch. She walked among the people, asking discreetly about a cowboy known for his bravery and kindness. Every answer brought her closer, yet she felt a growing nervousness in her chest. What if he had moved on? What if he no longer remembered her? These thoughts haunted her, but she pushed forward, guided by the memory of his protection and the bond that had formed in that storm. At the same time, Jacob received visitors at his ranch. Local ranchers had come to discuss cattle routes and trade, and they mentioned a young woman asking about him. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. Could it be the girl from that storm? He dismissed the thought at first, afraid of disappointment, but something inside him urged him to pay attention. Ayanna finally arrived at a town near the plains, close enough to the ranch that she could watch from a distance. She saw the familiar shapes of horses and fences, and her heart raced. She knew she had found him. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and approached carefully, not wanting to startle him or make her presence seem strange. Jacob, meanwhile, went about his day but couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He felt a tug of anticipation, a quiet sense that the past was returning to him. He had thought many times about that winter night, but never imagined that the girl he had saved would one day return, grown and strong, to find him again. When their eyes met for the first time in years, both felt a shock that left them momentarily speechless. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Do you remember me, cowboy?" she asked. Jacob stared, his mind racing. "I'm the girl you saved. I'm Ayanna. I've come to find you." Jacob's heart pounded. He recognized her instantly, though she had grown into a young woman. Her eyes held the same courage, the same determination he had seen in the snow all those years ago. He felt a mix of relief, amazement, and joy. "Ayanna," he whispered, unable to finish his thought. Words could not capture the flood of memories and emotions he felt at that moment. They spent the day talking, walking through the town and sharing their stories. Ayanna told him of the years she had spent learning, surviving, and growing, and Jacob shared his experiences on the ranch, the loneliness he had endured, and the hope that had quietly persisted in his heart. Each story strengthened the bond between them, a connection that had survived time and distance. Despite the joy of reunion, they both understood that life had changed. Ayanna's community had its own expectations, and Jacob's life as a rancher demanded responsibility and hard work. Yet, the spark between them was undeniable. They had been brought together by fate once before, and now fate had given them a second chance. Evening fell, painting the sky with soft orange and pink hues. Ayanna and Jacob sat on a hill overlooking the plains. The wind was gentler now, carrying the scent of grass and earth instead of snow and ice. They spoke quietly, sharing hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. Ayanna admitted that she had always remembered him, always hoped to see him again. Jacob admitted that he had felt her absence all these years, wondering if she had survived and if he would ever see her again. The reunion was not just a meeting of past and present, but the beginning of a new chapter. Both understood that their bond had been tested by time, distance, and life's hardships. Yet it had endured, stronger than ever. The courage of that winter night had left a lasting mark, and now their paths had converged once more. As the stars appeared in the night sky, they made a silent promise to each other, to face the future together, to honor the connection that had saved a life and shaped their hearts. Though they did not yet know all the challenges that lay ahead, they were ready to confront them, guided by the trust and love that had grown from a single act of bravery years ago. Jacob and Ayanna parted that night with a new understanding of each other and of life. Each returned to their respective homes carrying hope and anticipation. The bond between them had been renewed, and both knew that this was only the beginning. The years of separation had strengthened their spirits, and now they were prepared for the journey that lay ahead, a journey that would ultimately bring them together, not just as survivor and savior, but as equals, companions, and perhaps something even deeper. In the quiet of the night, both thought of the storm that had changed their lives. Ayanna had survived because of Jacob's courage, and Jacob had been forever changed by her resilience. Their destinies were intertwined, and the world, vast and often harsh, had brought them back together, reminding them that some connections are meant to endure beyond time, distance, and circumstance. The sun was just rising over the horizon, spilling soft golden light across the wide plains. Jacob was already awake, tending to the horses and preparing the morning chores on his ranch. It was a quiet life he had built for himself, filled with work, the rhythm of the land, and the occasional visit from neighboring ranchers. Yet this morning felt different. Something tugged at him, a subtle feeling of anticipation he could not explain. Ayanna rode into the ranch slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar sights. The fences, the wide-open fields, and the barns looked as he had described in her mind over the years. She had imagined this place countless times, wondering what it would feel like to finally see him again, to stand where he had stood and to speak to him face to face. Her heart raced, but she reminded herself to stay calm. Today she would tell him the truth, that she was the girl he had saved all those years ago. Jacob noticed her the moment she approached. At first he thought she might be a traveler passing through, or perhaps someone needing work on the ranch. But something in her gait, the way she held herself, felt familiar. There was a quiet strength in her presence, a calmness that reminded him of someone he had once known in the midst of a snowstorm. Ayanna dismounted gracefully, tying her horse near the barn. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then she walked toward Jacob, each step measured yet full of purpose. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Jacob froze, a strange mixture of recognition and disbelief washing over him. "Jacob," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm confidence that surprised him. He blinked, unsure. Can I help you?" he asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady. Ayanna smiled faintly, but her eyes held a glimmer of emotion he could not ignore. "Do you remember me, Jacob?" I am the girl you saved in the snowstorm so many years ago. Ayanna. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The memories came rushing back. The storm, the cold, the terror in a young girl's eyes, and the desperate struggle to keep her safe. He took a step closer, studying her face. Though she had grown into a young woman, her eyes were the same, full of courage and life. He felt a rush of emotions, relief, amazement, and a deep, quiet joy. Ayanna? He whispered, almost in disbelief. It can't be. Are you really? It is me. I have come to find you, Jacob. I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to see you again. Jacob felt a warmth in his chest that he had not known in years. He gestured for her to sit on a nearby bench, and they began to talk. At first, their conversation was filled with simple questions about the ranch, the horses, the weather, but soon they shared their stories from the years apart. Ayanna spoke of her life with her family, of learning the ways of her people, of surviving challenges, and of the quiet hope that kept her searching for him. She told Jacob how she had imagined him many times, wondered if he was safe, and hoped she might one day see him again. Her words were calm but full of emotion, and Jacob listened intently, feeling as though the years of separation melted away. Jacob, in turn, shared his own story. He spoke of the ranch, of the lonely winters, and of the many travelers and strangers he had met along the way. But most importantly, he spoke of the memory that had never left him, the memory of carrying a small girl through the blizzard, of her shivering body pressed against him, of her terrified eyes trusting him completely. He admitted quietly that he had often thought about her, wondered if she had survived, and hoped she had found happiness. As the morning passed, they walked through the ranch together. Jacob showed her the barns where the horses slept, the fields where the cattle grazed, and the river that ran near the edge of his property. Ayanna listened, admired the land, and occasionally smiled at memories that surfaced. It was as if time had folded, bringing the past and present together in a single perfect moment. There was a quiet understanding between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Ayanna had returned not only to thank Jacob, but to reconnect with the man who had changed her life forever. Jacob, in turn, felt a mixture of relief and joy that the girl he had saved had grown into such a strong and remarkable young woman. Their bond, formed in the cold and fear of a winter storm, had survived time, distance, and uncertainty. Over lunch, they sat together on the porch, sharing simple food and stories. The wind carried the scent of the plains, fresh grass, and the distant mountains. Ayanna spoke of her dreams, of the life she had imagined for herself, and of her desire to remain connected to Jacob. Jacob, listening, felt a warmth spread through him, a sense that life had come full circle, that the years of waiting and wondering had finally led to this moment. By the afternoon, they were no longer strangers. They laughed together, shared small jokes, and discovered common interests. Ayanna found herself fascinated by the ranch work, asking questions about the animals, the land, and the responsibilities Jacob carried. Jacob, in turn, was impressed by her intelligence, her curiosity, and her gentle strength. It was clear to both of them that something rare and meaningful had been rekindled. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with soft orange and pink hues, Ayanna and Jacob found themselves sitting on the edge of the pasture. The colors of the sunset reflected in her eyes, and Jacob felt a connection so strong it almost startled him. "I have waited a long time to see you again," Ayanna said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years and the strength of her heart. "And I never stopped thinking about you," Jacob replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I wondered if you had survived, if you had grown strong, and if maybe, someday, we would meet again." They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the soft neighing of horses, the rustle of the wind through the grass, and the distant call of birds returning home. It was a peaceful scene, yet filled with the energy of a story that had spanned years and had finally reached this point. Ayanna reached out and touched Jacob's hand, a small gesture that carried a lifetime of gratitude, trust, and growing affection. Jacob took her hand gently, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Neither spoke, for words could not capture the depth of their emotions. They had been brought together by courage and fate, by a single night that had changed both their lives forever. As twilight descended, Jacob and Ayanna made plans to spend the following days together, exploring the ranch, sharing meals, and learning more about each other. They knew that the bond they shared was special, that it had been tested by time, and that it deserved care, attention, and respect. Each moment together was precious, a chance to reconnect and strengthen the connection that had begun so many years ago. That night, as the stars appeared one by one in the vast sky, Jacob sat quietly outside his cabin, thinking of the girl he had saved and the young woman she had become. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her survival, for her return, and for the chance to know her once more. Ayanna, in her own space nearby, looked up at the same sky, feeling the same quiet joy and wonder. They had both endured years apart, each carrying memories, hopes, and dreams. And now, finally, their paths had crossed again. The storm that had once separated them had led to a reunion that neither could have imagined, a reunion filled with emotion, understanding, and the promise of something greater. Jacob and Ayanna knew that challenges would come, that life would test them again. But in this moment, as night fell softly over the plains, they allowed themselves to simply be together. They shared laughter, stories, and quiet glances, knowing that the bond formed in a moment of danger had grown into something enduring, something rare, and something beautiful. And though the world was vast and uncertain, Jacob and Ayanna felt a sense of peace. They had found each other again, and that was enough. For now, the past had shaped them, the years had strengthened them, and the present offered them a chance to begin a new chapter, together. The days following Ayanna's arrival at the ranch were filled with joy, laughter, and a quiet wonder. Jacob and Ayanna spent hours walking through the fields, tending to the horses, and talking about the years they had spent apart. Yet, despite the happiness, a shadow of concern lingered in both their minds. Life had changed since the winter night that had brought them together. There were challenges to face, questions to answer, and decisions that could affect the rest of their lives. Ayanna's community, proud and deeply connected to tradition, watched her with interest. Her family had always valued her safety and guidance, and they were cautious about the intentions of the cowboy who had once saved her life. While they trusted Jacob's courage and character, the thought of Ayanna living far away on a ranch, in a world so different from her own, caused them to worry. They had seen life's hardships and knew how quickly circumstances could shift. Jacob, too, felt the weight of responsibility. Running the ranch required constant attention, and the plains could be unforgiving. While he cared deeply for Ayanna and felt the bond between them growing stronger every day, he wondered if their worlds were too different. Could a life together really work? Could she adapt to the demands of ranch life? And could he honor her traditions while maintaining his own way of living? One afternoon, as they walked along the river that ran through the edge of the ranch, Ayanna spoke carefully. "Jacob, I know my people may worry. I know our lives are very different, but I also know that we share something special, something that has lasted despite years apart." Jacob nodded slowly, thinking of the long winters, the loneliness of the plains, and the memories of the storm. "You're right," he said. I've never forgotten you, Ayana. I've never stopped hoping that one day we might meet again. But we have to be careful. There are many things to consider: our families, our responsibilities, and the life we each lead. Ayana smiled gently, reaching for his hand. I'm willing to face those challenges. I have learned to survive, to adapt, and to trust in the people I care about. If we want this, we can find a way to make it work. Over the following days, they faced practical challenges as well. Ayana helped with the ranch work, learning to care for the cattle, mend fences, and ride the horses across the wide fields. Jacob was patient, teaching her each skill carefully. Ayana, though determined, was not used to such physical labor, yet she never gave up. She laughed at her mistakes, learned quickly, and gained Jacob's admiration once more. At the same time, Jacob made efforts to visit Ayana's community. He wanted her family to see who he was, to understand his intentions, and to know that he genuinely cared for their daughter. The visit was cautious at first. Some members of her family were skeptical, questioning whether a cowboy could truly provide the life and respect Ayana deserved. Others saw the courage in Jacob's actions, recalling the story of the storm and the bravery he had shown. Through long conversations by the fire, Jacob explained his life, his values, and his desire to honor Ayana's heritage. He spoke of his respect for her culture, his wish to build a life that respected both their worlds, and his hope that together they could create something lasting. Slowly, the family began to see the sincerity in his words. Ayana's father, who had been quiet for much of the discussion, finally spoke. "You saved her life once," he said. "That is not something easily forgotten. But life is long, and actions now must match courage then. If you truly care for her, you will prove it not just in words, but in your dedication and respect for her people." Jacob nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I promise to do my best every day." As the sun set over the plains, Ayana and Jacob walked back to the ranch. The conversation with her family had been difficult but important. Both knew that love alone could not solve every challenge, but trust, respect, and commitment could guide them through. Despite these careful steps, not everyone was supportive. Some neighboring ranchers questioned the relationship, whispering doubts about a cowboy and an Apache woman. Jacob paid little attention to gossip, but Ayana felt the sting of skepticism. She knew that prejudice and fear could complicate life, but she refused to let it affect her determination. She had survived far worse challenges before, and this, she decided, would be no different. One evening, as they sat by the riverbank watching the stars appear, Ayana spoke about her future. "Jacob, I want to be with you, no matter the obstacles. But I also want to honor my people, my family, and the life I've known. Can we find a way to balance both?" Jacob considered her words carefully. "We can," he said finally. "It will not be easy, and it will take time, but I believe we can make it work. We have the courage to face challenges, and that's what matters." Their plan took shape slowly. Ayana would spend part of her time on the ranch, learning and helping with the work. Jacob would make regular visits to her community, learning their customs and gaining their trust. Together they would bridge the gap between two worlds, building a foundation of understanding and respect. As weeks turned into months, their bond grew stronger. Each day they learned more about each other's strengths and weaknesses. They shared laughter, handled small crises on the ranch, and celebrated successes together. Jacob admired Ayana's determination and intelligence, while Ayana appreciated Jacob's patience and dedication. Their differences became strengths, allowing them to complement each other in ways that neither had expected. One afternoon, after a long day of work, They sat together on the porch of the ranch house. The wind carried the scent of the plains, the gentle rustling of the grass, and the distant call of birds returning home. They spoke quietly about the future, dreaming together while acknowledging the challenges ahead. "We have come far," Jacob said, looking at her with a mixture of pride and affection. "But there is still work to do. We must be patient, persistent, and kind, not only to each other, but to the people around us."
Ayanna nodded, resting her head on his shoulder.
"I am ready, Jacob. I have waited for this moment, and I will do whatever it takes to make our life together meaningful and strong." Night fell softly over the plains, bringing with it a calm and quiet peace. Jacob and Ayanna sat together in silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch and the land. The challenges of the future felt smaller with their hands joined, their hearts aligned, and their spirits connected. They had faced storms before, literal and figurative, and they had survived. Now they were ready to face the future together. The story of the cowboy and the girl he had saved was no longer just a tale of courage. It had become a story of commitment, understanding, and hope. Each obstacle they overcame strengthened their bond, teaching them patience, compassion, and resilience. They realized that life would not always be easy, but love combined with respect could guide them through. In the months that followed, their plan unfolded with care. Ayanna spent time at the ranch and with her family, learning and teaching, adapting and growing. Jacob showed her the work of the land, the challenges of raising cattle, and the joys of living close to nature. Together they built routines, traditions, and moments of happiness, proving to themselves and others that their bond was genuine and enduring. Though obstacles remained, both knew that the path they were on was worth every effort. Their lives, once separate and uncertain, had intertwined in a way that felt destined. The trials they faced strengthened them, and the love that had begun with a single act of courage now became the foundation for a life full of promise, hope, and mutual respect. And in the quiet moments when the wind swept across the plains and the stars shone brightly overhead, Jacob and Ayanna held on to each other, knowing that together they could face whatever challenges life might bring. The past had shaped them, the present was their gift, and the future, uncertain but full of possibility, awaited them both. Spring had returned to the plains, painting the fields in soft shades of green and gold. The air was warm and fresh, carrying the scents of wildflowers and the faint aroma of the river. After months of careful planning, discussion, and mutual understanding, Jacob and Ayanna were ready to take the next step in their lives together. The time had come to unite not just their hearts, but their futures. The preparations for their wedding were simple, but heartfelt. Jacob wanted the ceremony to reflect both their lives, the ranch where he worked, and the traditions of Ayanna's people. Together, they invited friends from the ranch, neighbors from nearby towns, and members of Ayanna's family. Everyone they cared about would be present to witness a story that had begun years ago under a winter storm and had grown into something remarkable. On the morning of the wedding, the ranch buzzed with quiet excitement. Jacob adjusted his coat and hat, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. Today was more than a ceremony. It was a promise, a commitment to face life's challenges together, to honor each other's past, and to build a future side by side. Ayanna rose early, dressed in a simple gown adorned with patterns reflecting her heritage. Her long hair, dark and glossy, was braided carefully, and a small flower crown rested lightly on her head. She looked radiant, yet calm, a reflection of the strength and courage she had shown all her life. She felt the presence of her family and community, their support a gentle reassurance. Most importantly, she felt Jacob's love. steady and true, anchoring her as she prepared for the day ahead. The ceremony took place in a quiet clearing near the river, where the plains opened wide and the sky stretched endlessly above. The soft breeze carried the rustling of grass and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Jacob stood waiting, his heart steady but full, watching the figure of the woman who had once been a frightened girl now walk toward him. When their eyes met, time seemed to pause. Ayana's steps were confident and graceful, and Jacob felt a deep sense of awe and gratitude. He remembered the night he had carried her through the snow, and now, here she was, alive, strong, and ready to share her life with him. Every challenge, every year of waiting, had led to this moment. The officiant, a respected member of Ayana's community who had been part of her family's traditions, spoke gently about the meaning of marriage. He emphasized respect, trust, courage, and love, values that had defined Ayana's life and now would guide their union. He welcomed Jacob into the community, acknowledging the bravery and sincerity he had shown, and praised Ayana for her resilience and determination. Jacob took Ayana's hands in his, feeling the warmth of her skin and the strength in her grip. "Ayana," he said softly, "from the day I found you in the snow, I have never forgotten you. You have grown into someone remarkable, and I promise to protect, respect, and honor you for the rest of my life." Ayana's eyes shone with tears she did not try to hide. "Jacob, you saved my life when I was lost and afraid. You believed in me even when I could not. I promise to stand by your side, to share in your work, your joys, and your challenges. Together we will face the future with courage and love." The officiant smiled as they exchanged vows, seeing the deep connection and mutual respect between them. It was a ceremony filled with sincerity and quiet beauty, reflecting the bond that had grown over years of separation, reflection, and reunion. After the vows, they exchanged simple rings, tokens of their commitment and love. Jacob slipped a plain silver band onto Ayana's finger, and she placed a similar ring on his. It was a small gesture, yet filled with immense meaning, a promise of loyalty, partnership, and shared life. The celebration that followed was joyful but humble. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered to share food, stories, and laughter. Children ran through the fields, chasing each other under the bright sun, while adults spoke quietly, reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought Jacob and Ayana together. Music filled the air, soft melodic tunes from both cultures blending in harmony. Ayana and Jacob spent the day walking among their guests, greeting smiles and warm words. Many were inspired by the story of their reunion, seeing how courage, perseverance, and mutual respect could bridge even the widest gaps. Jacob marveled at Ayana's grace and strength, while Ayana felt comfort in Jacob's calm and steady presence. Together, they were a reflection of harmony between two worlds, proof that love and understanding could overcome even the greatest challenges. As the sun began to set, painting the plains with shades of orange and pink, Jacob and Ayana found a quiet moment alone. They sat by the riverbank, watching the water ripple in the soft evening light. The wind carried the scent of the fields and the distant sound of animals settling for the night. It was peaceful, and yet the day had been full of energy, emotion, and joy. "I can't believe this is real," Ayana whispered, leaning into him. "After all these years, after everything we faced, we are finally together." Jacob held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. "It is real," he replied. "We have waited, we have grown, and now we have the chance to build a life together. I am grateful for every moment that led to this, and I will cherish every day with you." Night fell over the plains, and stars appeared one by one in the vast sky. The couple walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, feeling the weight of the past lift and the promise of the future settle over them. Their journey had not been easy, but it had been filled with courage, determination, and a love that had endured time and distance. In the following weeks, Jacob and Ayana settled into their new life together. They worked side by side on the ranch, shared meals, and spent quiet evenings by the fire, talking and planning. They learned from each other, blending traditions and skills and building a partnership that was strong, respectful, and loving. Ayana's family grew to trust Jacob completely, seeing how he respected their customs and cared for their daughter. The community, once skeptical, came to admire their dedication, understanding that love, respect, and perseverance could overcome differences and bring people together. Jacob and Ayana also found time for themselves. They explored the plains, rode horses across open fields, and shared quiet moments under the stars. The bond that had begun on a cold winter night had grown into something deep, unshakable, and filled with promise. They were no longer just survivor and savior. They were partners, equals, and companions ready to face life together. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside their cabin, Jacob looked at Ayana and smiled. "Do you remember that first night in the snowstorm?" he asked. Ayana nodded, her eyes shining. "I remember every detail. I remember the cold, the fear, and the warmth you gave me. That night changed everything." Jacob squeezed her hand gently. "It changed me too. And now, years later, we have a chance to live fully, together." That night was only the beginning. They sat quietly, listening to the soft sounds of the plains, the rustling grass, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle whisper of the wind. Life was vast, sometimes harsh, and full of unexpected turns. But in that moment, Jacob and Ayana felt complete. They had survived storms, faced challenges, and overcome distance and doubt. Now they could move forward together, guided by courage, respect, and a love that had endured the test of time. Their story became known in the region, shared quietly around campfires and over evening meals. People spoke of the cowboy who had saved a girl in a snowstorm, and the girl who had returned years later to marry him. It was a story of bravery, patience, and enduring love, a reminder that single acts of courage could shape lives and that destiny often had its own plan, unfolding in surprising and beautiful ways. Jacob and Ayana lived the rest of their days in harmony, balancing their worlds, respecting their communities, and cherishing each other. Their love, born from a moment of peril, had grown into a lifetime of partnership. They raised children together, taught them the values of courage, respect, and compassion, and shared stories of resilience and hope. And every time the wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers, they would smile at each other, remembering the night that had started it all, the night a cowboy saved an Apache girl, and the night a bond was formed that would last forever.